Conrail's main line between Cleveland and Chicago is the busiest rail line for freight traffic in the eastern United States. Come along with us as we view 24 hours of action on Conrail's Chicago line at Oak Harbor, Ohio. We will even be lucky enough to see some of the Norfolk Southern trains that cross over Conrail at Oak Harbor. Oak Harbor is 23 miles east of Toledo and 85 miles west of Cleveland in northeastern Ohio, astride Conrail's busy East Coast to Chicago main line. Oak Harbor lies in the shadow of Lake Erie, only 8 miles from the lake, and the terrain around Oak Harbor is completely flat in all directions. At Oak Harbor, the former New York Central track sweeps around a 79-mile-per-hour curve and is completely straight for 10 miles either side of Oak Harbor. At night, the headlights of trains can be seen approaching for nearly 10 miles in either direction. Freight trains from Chicago, Elkhart, Detroit, and Toledo head east through Oak Harbor to Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Boston, the New York City metropolitan area, and vice versa. Amtrak's Lakeshore Limited and Capital Limited between Chicago and the East Coast pass through Oak Harbor at speed. Norfolk Southern's Bellevue to Toledo and Detroit line crosses over Conrail on the west side of Oak Harbor. This line hosts about 6 trains a day, with half of the traffic being coal from West Virginia to power plants in Michigan or to the port of Toledo. We will get to see the daylight trains on this line. Passenger trains haven't stopped here at Oak Harbor for many decades, but the former depot is still used by maintenance of way forces. This building is at the apex of a sweeping curve from which one can see headlights of approaching trains for many miles in either direction. Oak Harbor is a popular spot for rail fans to gather on sunny weekends. We will begin our Oak Harbor Odyssey on the afternoon of Saturday, November 12, 1994. The westbound intermodal fleet is due, so come along with us to watch the show that Conrail puts on at Oak Harbor, Ohio. Our first train at 2:46 in the afternoon is Conrail's westbound NDH, a trainload of steel coil from LTV Steel in Cleveland to another LTV plant at Hennepin, Illinois. Hennepin is on what used to be called the Kankakee Belt, a secondary line of the New York Central that allowed trains from the New York Central to bypass the Chicago area and connect with the Santa Fe Railroad at Streator, Illinois. Some Conrail trains still take that route to get to the Santa Fe at Streator and also to get to the LTV steel mill in Hennepin, which is west of Kankakee and Streator. "12 minutes later, TV11 runs around the steel train on the north track. TV11 originated at Kearny, New Jersey last evening and is due into Conrail's 47th Street Intermodal Yard in Chicago just 12 hours from now. Most of Conrail's intermodal schedules have slack built into them, and TV11 is about 4 hours ahead of time through here, although this is a typical time for TV11 to blast through Oak Harbor. TV11 has 53 loads, no empties, and 4,500 tons, including the many double-stacked J.B. Hunt and Santa Fe containers on the head end of this train. TV11 runs on former New York Central track via Selkirk Yard near Albany and Buffalo from New Jersey rerouted off the former Pennsylvania Railroad route via Pittsburgh a couple of years ago because of clearances on that route. At 4:16 p.m., our first Conrail eastbound TOMT rolls onto the Norfolk Southern overpass. TOMT stands for Toledo to Metuchen. This train originates at Stanley Yard in Toledo with blocks for Buffalo, Selkirk, and Tarrytown in New York, and Linden and Metuchen in New Jersey. The last 3 points have auto assembly plants nearby, accounting for the many auto parts in this train. TOMT runs via Selkirk and a river line along the west side of the Hudson River to New Jersey. A very impressive 11,000-foot-long, 7,500-ton westbound TV1 running at nearly 60 miles per hour is next, with its ditch lights flashing on the lead B40-8 for the nearby grade crossing. TV1 is the primary intermodal train from the Philadelphia area to Chicago. The intermodal yard for Philadelphia is located in Morrisville, Pennsylvania, about 15 miles northeast of Philadelphia, just across the Delaware River from Trenton, New Jersey. TV1 sets out intermodal traffic from Morrisville bound for Indianapolis and St. Louis at Harrisburg and picks up additional traffic at Harrisburg for the 47th Street intermodal ramp in Chicago. This huge train will be over 2 hours ahead of its schedule into Toledo, where the crew will be changed. Snyder National and J.B. Hunt are the two largest full truckload truckers in the country and have taken to the rails in a big way since the Santa Fe and J.B. Hunt began this return to the rails by major truckers in 1990. This trucker business has grown dramatically on Conrail in the last year, and there are many of the silver-sided J.B. Hunt trailers and orange Snyder National trailers on both of the intermodal trains that we have seen so far. An hour later at 5:34 p.m., westbound BUEL charges through Oak Harbor behind two Burlington Northern units, including a cabless B30-7A. Michigan and Conrail pool power on one or two trains in each direction out of Chicago, although this train is not one of the trains that usually has BN power on it. BUEL originates at Conrail's hump yard in Buffalo known as Frontier Yard and picks up auto parts from two nearby GM plants at Seneca west of Buffalo and works at Collinwood and Rockport yards in the Cleveland area. This train has 69 loads, 70 empties, and 8,700 tons through here. Besides Seneca, the loaded and empty auto parts in this train came from Cleveland and from Canada as Canadian National and Canadian Pacific trains run into Frontier Yard. Elkhart Yard in Elkhart, Indiana, about 100 miles east of Chicago, where BUEL is headed, is Conrail's primary yard for classifying carload or manifest traffic for connections at Chicago. A westbound Norfolk Southern train is next. Norfolk Southern number 331 begins its journey at the Bellevue, Ohio hump yard 30 miles southwest of here. From Bellevue, NS tracks extend in 5 directions. Number 331 has a block of grain on its head end for Toledo and also auto parts and empty autos for Detroit, where this train will terminate. Number 331 is the secondary manifest train on this line and does not run every day. This Norfolk Southern line is former nickel plate trackage. The nickel plate Alpha Jet train, so named because they took a half a dozen different railroads whose names began with most letters of the alphabet to get to their destinations on the East Coast, began their journey at Toledo and ran through here in the 1950s and 1960s, prior to this line becoming part of the Norfolk and Western in 1964. Now this line is used mostly by coal trains to get to the Port of Toledo and to coal users in Michigan. We will not shoot any Norfolk Southern trains at night because moving our light and camcorder would risk missing Conrail trains. Eight minutes later at 5:50 p.m., a long Conrail westbound rolls through Oak Harbor behind a LMS unit. LMS stands for Locomotive Management Services, a joint General Electric Conrail company that leases new GE power. Some of these LMS units will be leased to railroads other than Conrail, or will spend only part of the year on Conrail. Train SEEL has 155 cars, mostly empties, for connections at Chicago, and runs from Conrail's primary hump yard in the northeast at Selkirk, New York, outside of Albany, to Elkhart, Indiana. Both Elkhart and Selkirk hump yards were built in the early 1960s from excess mainline track as the New York Central slimmed down their main line from 3 or 4 tracks to 2 tracks. Centralized traffic control was installed through here at the same time the 3rd and 4th mains were removed in 1962. Conrail's manifest or carload trains have a 4-letter train symbol, where the first 2 letters refer to the point where the train originates and the last 2 letters to the place where the train terminates. Thus, this train is SEEL for Selkirk to Elkhart. Intermodal trains have the symbol TV for trail van train followed by a number. For a short period earlier this year, trail van trains were called supervan trains and had an SV symbol. Westbound TV trains have odd numbers while eastbounds are even. Unit trains, such as the NDH steel train seen earlier, have their own unique train symbols on Conrail. A new eastbound with an unusual symbol is next. This is TV0, a new Conrail train that is due out of 47th Street in Chicago at 9:30 in the morning and Englewood Intermodal Yard at 11 a.m. with blocks for Harrisburg, Kearney, and North Bergen in New Jersey. This is sort of a cleanup train on a relatively slow 31-hour schedule from Englewood to Kearney. Why Conrail's schedule planner decided to name this train TV0 is beyond me. TV0 does have some truckers' trailers and hot UPS traffic on it. Another member of the westbound intermodal fleet is next at 6:35 p.m. TV7 was due out of Boston at 8 last evening and picks up additional intermodal traffic at Worcester and West Springfield in Massachusetts, bound for Chicago. The J.B. Hunt and Snyder National trailers came from Worcester. Conrail's Boston line can handle marine containers double-stacked as far east as Worcester, but not the taller domestic containers double-stacked. At Cleveland, cars for Cleveland and points southwest of Cleveland are set out, and additional traffic for Englewood Yard on Chicago's south side is picked up. TV7 is ahead of time through here. A Conrail eastbound manifest from Chicago is next. This on-time BRSE originates at the Belt Railway's clearing yard on Chicago's south side and bypasses Elkhart Yard on its way to Selkirk Yard near Albany. Many of the 56 loads, 4 empties, and 5,900 tons came from the Burlington Northern's number 168, which connects with the BRSE through the Belt Railway. A westbound Conrail manifest that bypasses the Elkhart Hump is next at 8:10 in the evening. PIPR originates at the former Pennsylvania Railroad hump yard in Conway, Pennsylvania, west of Pittsburgh, hence the PI in the train symbol. PIPR is out of Conway with cars for Elyria, west of Cleveland, Burns Harbor, Indiana, where there is a concentration of heavy industry, including a steel plant, and a large block of cars for the Chicago Northwestern's Proviso Yard, just west of Chicago. The coking coal is bound for Burns Harbor. The PR in the train symbol refers to Proviso. PIPR will pick up more Provisos at Elkhart. Our first Conrail stack train is next. Double stacks have grown dramatically in Conrail in the last few years, and Saturday night is a good night for stack trains. TV 207 runs from Port Newark, New Jersey, to the Chicago Northwestern's Global 2 container facility adjacent to their Proviso Yard west of Chicago. Westbound TV 207 handles stacks for St. Louis, Chicago proper, and the CNW out of Port Newark. TV 207 is allowed nearly 7 hours at DeWitt Yard in Syracuse, New York, to be switched, and the taller domestic containers double stacked. At DeWitt, TV 207 picks up containers from TV 13 and TV 261 and is usually a solid Chicago and Northwestern train out of there. Another long westbound manifest is next, 28 minutes later. PIEL originates at Conway Yard behind PIPR with cars for connections in Chicago other than the Chicago Northwestern and Burlington Northern, plus any other traffic for classification at Elkhart. As is the case with most westbound manifests bound for Elkhart or Chicago, this train is mostly empties with 29 loads, 118 empties, and 7,400 tons. And 18 of the loads appear to be company ballast. This train is over 8,000 feet long. There are a lot of empty lumber flats and boxes, and empty covered hoppers that carried potash, soda ash, and grain products in the other direction. Conrail has recently revised many of their manifest schedules to reduce the number of times that cars get humped, particularly loaded auto racks, and to reduce congestion in Elkhart. The earlier BRSE and PIPR are examples of trains that bypass at least one hump yard, in this case the Elkhart hump. Westbound TV61 for Chicago is next, 3 minutes later, running around PIEL on the other track at 65 miles an hour. TV61 was due out of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania at 7:30 this morning and is about 2 hours ahead of time through Oak Harbor. Many of the trailers on this train came from Baltimore off at TV25, which connects with TV61 at Harrisburg. The auto parts and the head end were picked up at Cleveland and are bound for a Chrysler assembly plant on the Chicago and Northwestern. Next, we have two westbounds at once. Mail 9 is first. Mail 9 is a hot intermodal train running from Morrisville, Pennsylvania to Chicago on a 25½ hour schedule. This is considerably slower than during Pensy days, but Conrail runs heavier intermodal trains these days. Mail 9 is passing MYTO on the other track. MYTO has only 26 cars, mostly auto parts bound for assembly plants in Michigan. MYTO stands for Motor Yard in Bedford, southeast of Cleveland, to Toledo. Mail 9 is running at near 70 miles per hour, the top speed on this line for intermodal trains, and is well ahead of its schedule. Mail 9 also has trailers from Harrisburg and Pittsburgh, including some trailers of mail, which give this train its name, and also many trailers for United Parcel Service. The eastbound counterpart to MYTO is next at 10:17 p.m. TOMY begins its journey at Stanley Yard in Toledo with cars for Sandusky, Fairlane, Twinsburg Motor Yard in Bedford, Ohio, for which this train is named. Most of this train comes off of other Conrail trains from various points in Michigan that terminate in Toledo. Besides auto parts and empty auto racks, TOMY has a block of loaded hoppers of coal for someone in the Cleveland area. The empty auto racks are bound for Fairlane, west of Cleveland, where a Ford assembly plant is located. Another hot westbound is next. TV-79 originates at Conrail's North Bergen Intermodal Yard across the Hudson River from New York City, with trailers for Syracuse, Cleveland, and a 47th Street intermodal ramp in Chicago, including more truckers' trailers. The Chicago block includes a block of flats for points other than Los Angeles on the Santa Fe Railroad. Again, this westbound is over 2 hours ahead of its somewhat relaxed 29-hour schedule through here. TV-79 will not change crews at Toledo. Its crew runs through from Cleveland to Elkhart. One of Conrail's new finished vehicle service trains is next. ML440 originates at Sterling, Michigan, north of Detroit, and picks up additional auto traffic in Detroit and Toledo, and later in Fairlane and in Cleveland. It is bound for the Doremus Avenue unloading ramp in Newark, New Jersey. At Cleveland, this train will be reclassified and will pick up loaded multilevels from the Norfolk Southern and some double stacks. ML440 runs via the former Erie-Lackawanna Southern Tier line through Binghamton to Newark. Another westbound stack train thunders through Oak Harbor at near 60 per. This huge train originated at Kearney, New Jersey, and runs via Binghamton on the former Erie-Lackawanna Southern Tier line to Buffalo, with American President's Line, Maersk, and Mitsui containers, all bound for the Chicago and Northwestern in Chicago. The earlier TV-207 carried containers for other customers to the C&W in Chicago. Many of these containers are headed further west to points on the Union Pacific via the Northwestern to Fremont, Nebraska. There are several refrigerated containers in the APL portion of this train, including new ones for truckers C.H. Robinson and KLLM. These domestic containers will carry fresh or frozen fruits and vegetables on a return trip. Conrail allows intermodal and auto trains to run at 70 miles per hour on unrestricted track if the axle count is less than 240 axles, the rough equivalent of 60 long flats or multi-levels. TV, mail, or ML symbol trains with more than 240 axles are limited to 60 miles per hour, and trains with more than 420 axles are limited to 50 miles per hour. This TV 203 has 9,600 tons and an estimated 492 axles and is nearly 12,000 feet long. TV 203 is moving nearly 60 miles an hour. What an incredible sight and sound. A very impressive TV-13 is next 20 minutes later at 11:22 p.m. TV-13 was due out of Boston at 11:45 p.m. last night. It picks up more traffic at Worcester and at West Springfield. Double-stacked 8-foot-high marine containers can be handled west of Worcester, but not double-stacked domestic containers, which can be as tall as 9 feet. At DeWitt Yard near Syracuse, TV-13 sets out some containers for the stack trains and picks up off of other trains. Out of DeWitt, TV-13 has stacks for the Southern Pacific and Chicago and Northwestern in Chicago and trailers for 47th Street. This 8,000-ton train is right on time through Oak Harbor. 17 minutes later, another westbound blasts through town. This is TVLA, Conrail's fastest intermodal schedule, and the last train of the night out of the New York area, which runs between North Bergen, New Jersey, and Englewood Yard and Chicago's South Side, just over 25 hours, via Conrail's River Line to Selkirk and the old New York Central Lake Shore Line through Buffalo and Cleveland. This schedule was slower than the 20 and 1/2 hour timing of the New York Central's Supervan 10 on the same route, and the Pennsylvania's 24-hour timing between Chicago and Kearney in the 1960s. Still, Conrail has this 8,200-foot-long, 5,300-ton train about 2 hours ahead of its tight schedule through here. TVLA has cars for the Santa Fe's QNYLA to Los Angeles, hence the LA in its train symbol. Amtrak's eastbound Capital Limited is next, recently equipped with superliners. "23 minutes later at 12:43 on Sunday morning, TV9 rattles Oak Harbor. TV9 was due out of Worcester, Massachusetts at 4:20 yesterday morning and is due at Englewood Yard in Chicago at 9 this morning. This third intermodal train out of New England and last of the westbound piggyback fleet has many UPS trailers and loads of mail from West Springfield for Toledo and Chicago. Traffic bound for points in Texas on TV 55 was set out at Cleveland. 10 minutes before this train, the Norfolk Southern ran an eastbound empty coal train, number 514, from the Port of Toledo to Williamson, West Virginia. Number 514 had 138 system hoppers behind 3 units. At 12:59 a.m., we get our first Conrail eastbound in over 2 hours. BRPI is due out of Belt Railway's Clearing Yard at 12:30 yesterday afternoon and is very close to schedule. It is headed to Conway Yard near Pittsburgh and will pick up at Fairlane and Motor Yards near Cleveland. Most of the 90 loads, 20 empties, and 11,300 tons came from the Southern Pacific and BN in Chicago. SP uses the Belt Railway as its primary yard in Chicago. Like the earlier manifest, there was little or no carload perishable traffic on this train. Eastbound loaded reefers used to be a staple of this former New York Central line and also the main line of the former Pennsy that this train is headed to. Now most of the perishable traffic that runs through here is handled in trailers and containers. Yet another westbound stack train is next, TV 263 from Kearney and Croxton, New Jersey to Chicago. TV 263 gets reclassified at DeWitt and picks up off of earlier trains. Out of DeWitt, TV 263 has stacks for the Burlington Northern and Southern Pacific and Chicago, and for Chicago proper, and single-level container traffic for Chicago. Among the containers for the BN are a number of Burlington Northern America domestic containers. TV-263 is well ahead of its relaxed 34-hour schedule between New Jersey and Chicago, as it is not due by Toledo until 4:30 a.m. Another eastbound manifest that bypasses the Elkhart hump is next, behind two LMS units. NPSE actually originates at the Union Pacific's North Platte Yard in Nebraska, the NP in the train symbol. The Chicago and Northwestern moves these cars in their NPCRA from Fremont to Conrail's Ashland Avenue Yard in Chicago, where a Conrail crew takes over. Out of North Platte, NPSE has blocks for Selkirk, Conway, and Elkhart. The Conway cars connect at Proviso to PRPI, which will be the next eastbound manifest on Conrail. NPSE does have some loaded refrigerator cars carrying mostly potatoes and frozen food from the Pacific Northwest on Union Pacific. Amtrak's eastbound Lakeshore Limited is next. The first eastbound Conrail intermodal train out of Chicago last evening is next, 24 minutes later at 1:57 a.m. TV-24 was begun just over a year ago and carries trailers from 47th Street in Englewood for Worcester, Boston, and Syracuse, and double stacks for Worcester and Palmer in Massachusetts and Elizabethport in New Jersey. At Painesville, Ohio, east of Cleveland, TV-24 will pick up additional stacks off of earlier stack trains. The double-stack containers on this train bound for the Boston line are limited to 19 feet in height unless they are single-stacked or filleted at DeWitt. Just before the eastbound Lakeshore Limited, Norfolk Southern ran an eastbound empty coal train, number 532, with 184 empty system hoppers from the Grand Trunk Western at Toledo, headed for Williamson, West Virginia. A long eastbound auto train, ML 470, from Toledo to Selkirk is next. ML 470 originates at Stanley Yard in Toledo, carrying autos off of Conrail trains from Detroit, and autos interchanged from CSX and the Grand Trunk Western at Toledo. 2 years ago, Conrail revised its auto trains to cut damage to autos in transit by keeping them out of hump yards as much as possible. These auto trains are part of what Conrail calls their Finished Vehicle Service Network. Recently, this network was further revised, with the Norfolk Southern delivering all autos bound for points on Conrail to Conrail at Cleveland. This train is the former TOSE, which is shorn of its non-auto traffic and is pre-blocked for unloading ramps on the East Coast so that it can be flat switched at Selkirk Yard near Albany and does not have to go over the hump at Selkirk. At Cleveland, autos for Cleveland, Buffalo, and Doremus Avenue will be set out to connect with other ML Series trains. Another westbound stack train is next. TV 555 operates once a week with Sealand containers from Buffalo to the Southern Pacific at their Bedford Park Yard in Chicago. From there, most of these containers will go on to Los Angeles. The containers on this train came from Toronto via the Canadian National to Buffalo, and from Little Ferry, New Jersey via the Susquehanna and Delaware and Hudson to Buffalo. An eastbound stack train is next 15 minutes later at 2:43 a.m. This is TV 202 from the Chicago Northwestern in Chicago. This on-time TV 202 gets its Conrail crew at Ashland Avenue in Chicago and has containers on it for American President's Line, Maersk, and Mitsui. All these containers are headed for customer ramps in the Kearney-Croxton area of northern New Jersey. TV 202 takes the Southern Tier Line via Binghamton to New Jersey. There are a few refrigerated containers carrying fresh and frozen fruits and vegetables from the West Coast in the APL portion of this train. The movement of perishables in double-stacked containers would seem to be a way for the railroads to gain back some of the perishable traffic and reefers that they lost to truckers in the 1960s and 1970s. An extra westbound manifest is next. This is an extra or advanced section of PIEL from Conway Yard near Pittsburgh to Elkhart Yard. Conrail symbols its extra manifest by adding the last digit of the day's date and an X after the train symbol. Thus, the symbol for this train is PIEL3X, an advanced section of PIEL due out of Conway Yard this morning, the 13th of November. The new C40-8W wide cab and SD40-2 have 44 loads, 90 empties, and nearly 8,000 tons in tow. Freight tonnage on this line through Oak Harbor has doubled since the days of the New York Central, which disappeared into Penn Central in February 1968. The New York Central used to run around 15 freights in each direction through here. Those trains were good size for their time, but Conrail runs even heavier trains today. Schedules have been slowed since the 1960s, although Conrail does an excellent job of keeping their trains on time unless the weather or an act of God interferes. Eastbound PRPI from Chicago and Northwestern is next, behind Union Pacific Power. PRPI has cars from North Platte off the Chicago and Northwestern's NPCRA, plus other cars from the Northwestern's Proviso Yard just west of Chicago, bound for Conrail's Conway Yard near Pittsburgh. From Conway, these cars will end up all over the East Coast. PRPI has a number of covered hoppers of soda ash and is quite heavy for its length, with 69 loads, 2 empties, and nearly 8,000 tons. 42 minutes later at 3:37 a.m., a long westbound PIBN from Pittsburgh rolls through Oak Harbor with 23 loads and 116 empties behind 2 new C40-8W wide cabs. Most of this train is cars blocked at Conway Yard for Northtown, Galesburg, and Cicero on the Burlington Northern, but PIBN also has blocks for the Santa Fe, EJ&E, and Belt Railway that will be set out at Elkhart to make a direct connection to trains due out of there later this afternoon. PIBN will then be delivered as a solid train to the Burlington Northern at their Cicero Yard on the west side of Chicago. By bypassing the hump at Elkhart, these cars should get to Galesburg and Northtown yards on the BN at least 12 hours sooner. 200 car trains of empties were run in this line during New York Central and early Penn Central days. 8,000-foot-long trains like this one are nearly the equal of those 200-car trains of the early 1960s, as most of the cars on those trains were 40 and 50-foot boxcars and refrigerator cars. Now large covered hoppers and tank cars dominate most of these manifest trains on Conrail. The heart of the eastbound intermodal fleet will now begin blasting through Oak Harbor. This is TV2H with a short train including mini truckers' trailers for Harrisburg loaded on the flats at Conrail's 51st Street ramp in Chicago. Regular TV2 is only 8 minutes behind this train. At 3:50 a.m., a long 4,200-ton TV2 roars through Oak Harbor. TV2 has more truckers' trailers and mail for Pittsburgh, Allentown, and Morrisville, Pennsylvania, where this train will terminate. These last two trains are within minutes of their scheduled time through here. At Cleveland, this train will take the former Pennsylvania Railroad track to Alliance, where it reaches the main line of the former Pennsy. About 1982, Conrail moved all Chicago-bound traffic from Pittsburgh and east off the former Pennsy main line west of Alliance, where Conrail had a line to Cleveland that these trains could take to reach this former lakeshore line of the New York Central. This allowed Conrail to close the former Pennsy main line west of Crest Line to through traffic. An eastbound manifest that was humped at Elkhart is next. ELSE has cars for Rochester, DeWitt Yard, and Selkirk Yard in New York, where this train will terminate. On this train is more soda ash and other cars from the Union Pacific at North Platte that came into Elkhart on PRSC, and a block of insulated boxcars from the Santa Fe carrying canned goods and wine from the San Joaquin Valley in California. ELSE has 87 loads, 9 empties, and nearly 9,600 tons behind 2 more of the new GEs. This train runs from Elkhart to DeWitt in 21.5 hours, while the New York Central's NY2, half the weight of this train, would make it in 17 hours in the 1960s. Another TV train is next. TV-14 begins its journey at Englewood Yard in Chicago and runs to Boston, with intermodal traffic for Toledo, Syracuse, West Springfield, and Worcester, in addition to Boston. Additional Boston cars are picked up at Toledo and Syracuse. TV-14's schedule is 33 hours to Boston, compared to a rather incredible, fastest ever 22-hour and 45-minute timing for SV-14 on the New York Central in 1967. Amtrak's westbound Capital Limited is next at 4:34 a.m. An extra or advanced section of eastbound BRPI is next. BRPI 3X has more cars from the Burlington Northern and the Belt Railway of Chicago for Conway Yard, including a number of refrigerated cars or reefers carrying mostly fresh and frozen potatoes off the BN. This train may also have picked up cars for Conway Yard at Elkhart. At 4:30 a.m., just before the Capital Limited was through, the Norfolk Southern ran a westbound loaded coke train through here, number 517, from Williamson, West Virginia, to Conrail at Toledo. NS number 517 had 100 loads behind 3 units and will eventually end up at a steel plant in Burns Harbor, Indiana. Eastbound TV 22 is next at 5:55 a.m. TV 22 carries all intermodal traffic from Chicago to ramps at Baltimore and Allentown, Pennsylvania. TV 22 has some single-stack containers for the Port of Baltimore. For many years, the Baltimore and Allentown blocks were handled in TV 62 that ran to Elizabethport, New Jersey, but most of the Elizabethport containers are now double-stacked and are on the 2 following TV trains, which take the river line via Selkirk and Buffalo to Elizabethport. The Allentown block will be set out at Harrisburg and take TV 62A to Allentown. "35 minutes later, TV 12 charges through town. Stacks for Kearney are on the head end of this nearly 6,000-ton TV-12, with many single-level containers following. The single-level containers for Kearney and Elizabethport, New Jersey, include many J.B. Hunt, Santa Fe, and Burlington Northern America domestic containers. TV-12 and its westbound counterpart, TV-11, were longtime residents on the former Pensy line through Pittsburgh, running between 47th Street Yard in Chicago and Kearney. These trains were recently shifted to the former New York Central route via Buffalo and Selkirk that takes the river line to get to the various intermodal facilities in northern New Jersey because this route has better clearances and can handle double stacks. When the clearance project on the former Pennsylvania, Reading, and Lehigh Valley lines across Pennsylvania is complete in mid-1995, some of these stack trains will probably be shifted back to the route via Pittsburgh and Reading. Yet another TV train follows 9 minutes later. The power on this train included, of all things, a Santa Fe Jeep 39-2. Eastbound TV 204 originates at Ashland Avenue in Chicago and is headed to northern New Jersey with containers from Western Connections bound for Boston, Kearney, Elizabethport, and Croxton. The containers for Boston will be set out at Syracuse to connect with TV 6 and will be filleted or single stacked as necessary. A heavy eastbound manifest rolls under the Norfolk Southern Overpass at 7:15 a.m. ELBU leaves Elkhart with 2 local blocks for Buffalo, along with a large group of cars for Frontier Yard, the former New York Central Hump Yard on the west side of Buffalo. This ELBU has 87 loads, 28 empties, and nearly 10,000 tons. Many of the cars in this train, including some of the auto parts, will end up in Canada, as several Canadian National and Canadian Pacific trains are blocked out of Frontier for points all over Ontario. All of these eastbounds through Oak Harbor in the last couple of hours have been ahead of time or very close to their scheduled time through here. A long westbound auto train, ML 421, from Niagara Falls to Chicago, approaches the sweeping curve by the Oak Harbor station. ML 421 starts out at Niagara Falls with autos assembled in Canada bound for the western U.S. and picks up autos from other assembly plants on the East Coast at Seneca just west of Buffalo. Some of these autos took a better clearance route to Buffalo via Harrisburg rather than running straight west of Pittsburgh on the former Pennsy Main Line through Pittsburgh. This routing will likely change when the project to improve clearances across Pennsylvania is completed in mid-1995. ML 421 also picks up autos at Ford's Fairlane Assembly Plant west of Cleveland. ML 421 used to be symboled NFCH for Niagara Falls to Chicago. It is now a full-fledged member of Conrail's Finished Vehicle Service Network. Its destination in Chicago is the Indiana Harbor Belt's Gibson Yard in Hammond, Indiana. This yard will flat switch these autos and ones from two other Conrail auto trains into several solid auto trains for the Union Pacific and Santa Fe railroads. These two railroads service most of the auto unloading facilities in the western United States. Except that it is headed in the opposite direction, this train is a dead ringer for the New York Central's ML-12 in the 1960s. In those days, ML-12 would originate in Detroit, and after picking up at Toledo and Fairline, could have nearly 3 miles of autos in tow across northern Ohio. The longest ML-12 that the producer is aware of carried 149 loaded auto racks in June of 1966. As ML 421 clears, an eastbound empty hopper train rolls under the Norfolk Southern overpass on the west edge of Oak Harbor. The symbol for this train is XBF 49, a unit train of empty hoppers returning to Pennsylvania. These hoppers probably brought coke or metallurgical coal used to produce coke to the Bethlehem Steel Plant in Burns Harbor, Indiana, about 30 miles east of Chicago on the shore of Lake Michigan. Another westbound auto train rounds the big curve at Oak Harbor with its ditch lights flashing. ML 433 began its journey at Framingham, Massachusetts, with empty multi-levels from loading points in the Boston area. It picked up and set out cars at Selkirk, but was not humped there. ML 433 also picks up and or sets out at DeWitt, Seneca, and Rockport Yard near Cleveland. Unlike the earlier ML series trains, this one has non-auto related traffic on it, including a number of gondolas carrying what looks like contaminated soil. ML 433 will terminate at Stanley Yard in Toledo, where these cars will be flat switched onto Conrail trains heading in all directions, with most of the empty auto racks bound for assembly plants in Michigan. The second Selkirk to Elkhart train is next at 8:32 in the morning. SEELP runs from Conrail's most important hump yard in the Northeast at Selkirk, New York, to its most important hump yard in the Midwest at Elkhart, Indiana. SEELP leaves Selkirk with blocks for Elkhart, Bryan, Ohio, and Parma near Cleveland, the P in the train symbol. SEELP has 8,500 feet of manifest traffic, including a number of empty reefers for Western connections at Elkhart. This train is midway through a run of 8 Conrail freights in 60 minutes through Oak Harbor. Even with the 40-mile-per-hour crossovers about every 10 miles or so, trains can get backed up, as the New York Central left few sidings behind on this portion of their main line when they reduced this line to 2 tracks in 1962. One thing we won't have to worry about on this Sunday is a maintenance of way window. A second section of the once-a-week TV 555 that we saw earlier is next, 16 minutes later. Like its first section through here 6 hours earlier, this westbound TV 555X is carrying mostly Sealand and Maersk containers from Buffalo to the Southern Pacific at their Bedford Park Yard in Chicago. Most of this train came from either Toronto via the Canadian National to Buffalo, or from Little Ferry, New Jersey via the Susquehanna and Delaware and Hudson to Buffalo. TV 555X is also being used to balance the supply of empty container flats between the East Coast and Chicago. Another extra stack train, eastbound TV 554X, is next, 5 minutes later, behind BN Power. TV 554X came from the Burlington Northern in Chicago with mostly Sealand and Maersk containers bound for the Canadian National and D&H in Buffalo. The D&H will deliver their share of this train to the Susquehanna Railroad at Binghamton, who will take the train to Little Ferry, New Jersey, opposite New York City. Many of these containers originated in Seattle or Tacoma on the BN and came from Asia. It looks like the power ran through on this train. This good-sized extra section of TV 554, which is scheduled to run only once a week, also has a block of containers for Worcester, Massachusetts that will be set out at Painesville, Ohio for tonight's TV 24 to pick up. Westbound PITO is next, 8 minutes later, with a pooled UP SD 40-2 as its second unit. PITO got out of Conway Yard early this morning with cars for Elyria and Toledo. A major portion of the cars on PITO are loaded and empty auto parts from plants on the East Coast bound for parts and assembly plants in Michigan and in the St. Louis area. The Elyria block set out earlier included auto parts for the Norfolk Southern at Lorraine. PITO also has quite a few chemicals and a number of loaded and empty gondolas that ferry scrap and steel back and forth between Pittsburgh and the Midwest. At Toledo, cars from this train connect with trains to Michigan and with trains to St. Louis and to the UP at St. Elmo, Illinois. Five minutes later at 9:06 a.m., the opposite number to the previous train crosses under the Norfolk Southern overpass. TOPI is mostly loads and weighs in at over 12,000 tons. This is the 8th train in the last 60 minutes. TOPI has blocks for Elyria and Rockport in the Cleveland area and for Conway Yard. The two Cleveland points each serve auto parts plants. Most of this train is headed to Conway. Besides quite a few auto parts and empty auto frame flats, TOPI has chemicals, grain, steel, and scrap bound for points all over the East Coast. Gondolas must be in short supply as there are 5 open-top hopper cars in this train filled with scrap iron. Since Enola Yard near Harrisburg was closed to most classification, Conway Yard near Pittsburgh, where this train terminates, is the Conrail classification yard for Pennsylvania and for the Atlantic seaboard. Another eastbound manifest for Conway is next, 12 minutes later. When Conrail schedules more than one section of a manifest train, the last digit of the day's date and an A for first section or B for second section is added to the train symbol. Thus, this first section of ELPI from Elkhart to Conway is symboled ELPI 3A. Two sections of this train are run on most days, and as you will see, both sections are good-sized trains. ELPI-A is due out of Elkhart at 3 a.m. with 3 Cleveland area blocks set out at Fairlane, plus cars for Conway. ELPI-B is due out of Elkhart 3.5 hours later with auto parts from Motor Yard near Bedford, plus Conways. Half of this train is covered hoppers carrying grain and grain products and potash and other chemicals from Western Connections at Chicago. Conrail has been slowly increasing the size of their manifest trains in recent years, and on average, they probably run the heaviest and longest manifest trains of any railroad in this country today. Amtrak's westbound Lakeshore Limited from New York City and Boston to Chicago is next at 9:40 a.m. Another eastbound TV train is next, 5 minutes later. TV-10 is the last trailer train of the night out of Chicago to Boston and to the New York area via Selkirk and River Line. TV-10 is due out of Englewood at 1:30 a.m. and is due into North Bergen and Boston at 8 a.m. and 12:30 p.m. respectively the next day. The trailers for the Boston line connect to TV-10B out of Selkirk. Sometimes both TV-10s will originate at Chicago, but not today. This train usually has more mail and UPS trailers on it than the mail-symboled trains, which will be the next eastbound TV trains. Westbound BUTO is next, passing the Oak Harbor Depot at 10:27 a.m. BUTO is another key player in Conrail's interconnected series of manifests that serve the auto industry. BUTO originates at Frontier Yard in Buffalo and works at Seneca, Rockport, Elyria, Fairlane, and Sandusky, and will terminate at Stanley Yard in Toledo. Most of these yards where BUTO works exist to serve a nearby auto assembly or parts plant. BUTO is actually about 5 hours late through here. 8 minutes later, we finally get a Norfolk Southern train crossing over Conrail, the first NS train by in over 6 hours. This long eastbound number 194 is returning excess power to Bellevue. Number 194 originates at Oakwood Yard in Detroit, then picks up and sets out in Toledo. This train could be heard on the scanner working in Toledo for some time before its arrival here. Number 194 takes the former Nickel Plate to Bellevue, 30 miles southeast of here, then takes the former Norfolk and Western line through Portsmouth and Roanoke to Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Number 194 will be reclassified at the Hump Yard in Bellevue. Norfolk Southern is running only this one eastbound manifest today, as number 332 from Detroit to Bellevue has been annulled. With the traffic from both trains, number 194 is over 9,000 feet long. Norfolk Southern handles quite a few autos and some auto parts from assembly and parts plants around Detroit and from plants across the river in Windsor, Ontario to the southeast. Not much intermodal traffic has run in this route out of Detroit to the east in recent years, in contrast to the many trailers handled by the AlphaJet trains through here in the early 1960s. But Norfolk Southern has begun to actively market intermodal traffic from Detroit to all points on their system, and intermodal traffic is now increasing on this line. Centralized traffic control was installed in this line by the Nickel Plate in the 1950s, as the NKP was running as many as 6 trains each way on this line in and out of Homestead Yard in Toledo. As many as 3 of these trains in each direction had the AJ or AlphaJet symbol and ran to or from Philadelphia and Baltimore via the Reading and Western Maryland railroads. These trains made a quick connection with trains from Chicago at Bellevue. From the Norfolk Southern overpass, we see the second scheduled westbound manifest from Elkhart to Pittsburgh, symboled ELPI-3B. This train has a rather incredible 130 loads, 42 empties, 16,700 tons, and is over 10,000 feet long. ELPI-3B has a few auto parts for Motor Yard at Bedford, 20 miles southeast of Cleveland, but most of this huge train will roll over Conway's eastbound hump. This guy has chemicals and some lumber and boxes of canned goods and wine from Western Connections at Chicago, but what really makes this train heavy is all the gondolas of steel and scrap iron. Conrail serves a number of steel mills in northwest Indiana near Chicago, and a good deal of their output is bound for the East Coast on this train. 6 of the covered hoppers in this train are flexi-flow hoppers that are pressurized to transfer their contents. Cement and flour are 2 bulk commodities carried in this type of car. For a short time in early 1993, Conrail tried radio-controlled slave units on the Elkhart to Selkirk train and ran that train up to 230 cars long and 23,000 tons. They had some problems with that operation, and the only regular use of slave units on Conrail today is on some of the Detroit Edison coal trains, which run up to 140 cars and 19,000 tons, not much heavier than this train. The first of the eastbound mail symbol trains is next, right on time at 12:34 in the afternoon. Mail 8 has the latest cutoff for intermodal traffic out of Chicago for New York and Pittsburgh. It was due to leave Englewood Yard at 5:30 this morning and is due into North Bergen, New Jersey at 10:30 tomorrow morning. Mail 8 takes this line to Cleveland, then takes the former Pennsylvania Railroad route via Pittsburgh to New Jersey, reaching the old Pennsy Main Line at Alliance, 57 miles southeast of Cleveland. This train has more UPS and other truckers' trailers and also has quite a few refrigerated trailers carrying fruits and vegetables. Most of the refrigerated trailers came from the Santa Fe Railroad in Chicago. A westbound manifest from Buffalo that serves the steel industry in northwest Indiana rolls by the Oak Harbor Station and under the Norfolk Southern. This is train BUBH, which stands for Buffalo to Burns Harbor. It originates at Seneca Yard west of Buffalo and picks up and sets out at Rockport near Cleveland. It has an eclectic mix of loaded hoppers carrying coking coal, 1 loaded tank car, and 68 empty steel coil cars among its nearly 7,000 tons. BUBH will only change crews at Elkhart and go directly to Burns Harbor. Bethlehem Steel has plants at Burns Harbor and at Lackawanna, New York, near Seneca, and a coke plant at Lackawanna. Some of the steel coil from Burns Harbor is finished at Lackawanna. There is no eastbound counterpart to this train. The second eastbound mail symbol train is next 2 minutes later at 12:54 p.m. Mail 8M for Mail 8 to Morrisville carries UPS business, mail, and many other trailers to Harrisburg and the Philadelphia area. This train terminates at Conrail's ramp at Morrisville, northeast of Philadelphia. Mail 8M also has some refrigerated trailers, including 3 new ones from truckers KLLM and Crete Carrier Corp. This last TV train of Saturday night out of Chicago, due to arrive at Morrisville at 8:45 tomorrow morning, is a half hour ahead of schedule through here. The 13,000 horsepower in the head end has 4,500 tons and 7,100 feet of trailers moving at near 65 miles an hour. Just over an hour later, Norfolk Southern number 195 heads west. Number 195 is the second Norfolk Southern manifest from the hump yard at Bellevue to Detroit, complementing number 331, which ran through here late yesterday afternoon. Number 195 actually originated at Winston-Salem and takes the same former Norfolk and Western route to Bellevue that 194 takes. 195 has more auto industry traffic on it and a small amount of intermodal traffic. This is the 6th and final Norfolk Southern train through here in 24 hours. 3 manifest and 3 loaded or empty coal trains between both directions is quite typical of today's NS traffic between Bellevue and Toledo. Our final Conrail train is eastbound TOMT from Toledo to Metuchen, New Jersey at 2:40 in the afternoon. With 74 loads, 35 empties, nearly 9,000 tons, today's TOMT is even bigger than yesterday's, with nearly a mile of auto parts for the Ford assembly plant in Metuchen and the GM plants at Linden, New Jersey and Tarrytown, New York. We have now been in Oak Harbor for 24 hours. Not double counting any train seen twice, Conrail has run 28 westbounds and 27 eastbounds, double the tonnage through here 30 years ago, and perhaps 20% greater than only a few years ago. On weeknights, Conrail also runs a short eastbound STES from Sterling, Michigan to the Delmarva Peninsula known as the Eastern Shore. A good deal of the increase in freight traffic through here has been in intermodal, as Conrail's intermodal volume is growing rapidly due to the growth in double-stack containers and increased use of the rails by truckers. Add to these Conrail trains 4 Amtrak and 6 Norfolk Southern trains, and you can see why this is a popular railfan hotspot. I hope you have enjoyed this look at Conrail at Oak Harbor, Ohio.